Hello, BookTube. I've got some mail to show you on this gray, overcast, rain-threatening Wednesday. But first, I thought we should have a nice, cheery talk about grief. I don't know why anybody watches this channel. I believe it or not, I have a reason for talking about grief. So we're going to start off the video by talking about deep grief. Aren't you glad you clicked on it? I have mentioned before on this channel that really deep grief, I don't mean a grandparent that you barely knew and, you know, the whole family's sad, so you're a little sad. I don't mean anything like that. I mean real deep grief, serious grief. In other words, where you lose someone about whom you have said without exaggeration, I cannot live without this person. Where you have loved them to such an extent that you say, without melodrama, I can't live without this person. You do. You are going to live without them. Nobody dies of heartbreak. That's a nice consoling myth, but it doesn't happen. You are going to live without them. You're not going to want to for a while. A solid week, a solid 2 weeks, maybe even a solid month. You're not going to want to, but you are going to live. Your heart's going to keep beating. Your brain's going to keep firing. Eventually, that grief, which is going to hit you like a hurricane, is going to blow itself out. And if you are grieving correctly, if you are grieving in a healthy way, then you will have spent that time, to belabor the metaphor, in shelter. So you will know there's a storm raging around you, and it will be really inconveniencing you. You'll be ruining your world. But you'll know that it's going to pass, and it will pass, and you will emerge from shelter. And although it seems unbelievable to you when it's happening, even traitorous, you will laugh again. You will love again. You will get out in the world. You will be silly again. All of those things will happen again once the first storm of that deep grief passes. You will even say again about someone else, I can't live without you. You will come to say that again. If you're grieving in a healthy way, if your emotions are healthy, if you don't let grief codify, if you don't let it become a psychosis, then it is a storm and it will batter you, and then it will pass and you will emerge back into the sunlight, and you will start to laugh and play and love again, including a love that, were you to lose it, would be another storm. That's just life. That's just the way it is. That's why you're here. You're here to care. Not to protect yourself from that kind of pain, but to willingly put yourself in its path. And I've said on this channel, now, isn't this a fest? I've said on this channel before, I would guess that most of you watching this video have not felt that kind of grief. No judgment, no condescension whatsoever. It's happenstance, right? I would guess that most of you haven't felt it. In my personal life, most of the people that I know, probably 90%, have not yet felt that. Now, most of the people that I know in my personal life are fairly young, and that makes sense. That it wouldn't happen that way, that you wouldn't have felt it yet. Most of the people I know, most of the people probably watching this video, have only felt the first kind of grief I was talking about, the kind of social grief, where you're sad because someone whose name you knew, someone about whom you knew a little bit, died. You go to the funeral or the wake, you know that people that knew this person better are sad. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something that blows your walls off, that blows your roof off, that brings your world to a halt as you cringe in shelter, just trying to survive the battering of that storm. That's the kind of grief I'm talking about here. If you haven't felt it, well, if you're loving, then you will. And it's nothing to praise. There's no upside to it at all. You will live through it. You are strong enough to live through it. Believe me, I know. Because I'm not particularly strong, and I've lived through it many times. One of the side effects, those of you who might be new to this channel, I very much love dogs. I don't view them as just pets. They're people. I know I grew up with them. I grew up with them and not with humans. I know them. I know what their personhood to the last detail. And when I love them in no different a way than I love any other species. And the problem with that is that dogs don't live long. 15 years if you're lucky. And then you're going through a grief again. And dogs are people just like anybody else. Some of them you will love more than others. Nobody likes to say that, but sometimes it's true. I don't know exactly what determines that, But some dogs, I know from experience, some cats, some pets, friends of any kind, relatives of any kind, some, the pain is worse than others, even if the time is the same. Perfect illustration of that was my previous 2 dogs. You see my little dog here, my little Frida Bean, but some of you have been with this channel long enough to remember my previous dogs. When I started a BookTube channel, I had 2 sweet, old, white-faced dogs. A black and white pointer named Malin, who was mild and gracious and timid, and a fat, gassy basset hound named Lucy, who was not any of those things. She also was not sane. Malin and I spent 15 years with Mary Todd Lincoln. She heard voices in her head. She didn't know what was happening. She was unbelievably, we're talking Geiger counter stupid. Just one of the stupidest animals that I've ever met in my life. And I've spent a lot of time around camels. I loved her, and I love them both. But they're a perfect example. I loved Malin in the way that I have loved the countless dogs that I've had in my life. But Lucy was special. I've only had 5 of those dogs. Of all the dogs I've had a countless number, except I know the number. Lucy was special. And I knew that she was special while she was still alive. In the earliest videos, if you're a glutton for punishment, you go back to my earliest videos, I routinely say that I'm loving BookTube, I'm loving the experience, and that the only thing that will make me stop is losing Lucy. Because I assumed that I could not live without her. I assumed that that blow, that storm, would actually destroy me. I knew perfectly well, on some level, I knew perfectly well that it wasn't going to do that. I had a beagle right before Lucy. They never actually met, but they came close to meeting. Malin met him. Who was very much like that. It was very much that kind of a dog. And I said the same thing. I cannot live without you. I won't live without you. I have no interest in living without you. I won't. I'll just stop when you leave me. And it didn't happen. And it's no betrayal. It's no lack of loyalty to the loved one when it doesn't happen. It just didn't happen. And it didn't happen to Lucy either. Not only did I stick around, I even kept making videos. I disappeared from the world for a while, and then I came back. And if you've been watching this channel in the last 4 years, you know perfectly well that I am perfectly able to love again and laugh again and be silly again and even have a wonderful dog again. That is just the nature of that kind of really deep grief. And another aspect of it, I promise I'm not going to talk about grief this whole video. I promise I'm not. But it sets up something that I want to show you. Because another aspect of that deep grief, not the surface kind where you go to the funeral, you're sad for a week, and then you forget about it. That storm of grief, that hurricane of grief, one other aspect of that kind of grief is that you're never completely done with it. It can return. That storm can return without any warning. Just as bad as it was in that first week, but only for a little while, only for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, at worst an afternoon. Not a whole week. You're not paralyzed by it, but you are completely dominated by it when it happens. And you often don't know. You often don't know what it's going to be. You often don't know. I have been walking down the street and seen someone walking a fat old basset hound. And one part of my brain says, all right, well, you need to find a private space because you're going to be bawling your eyes out in about 5 minutes, and it doesn't happen. Instead, I'm flooded with happy memories of my little hippo. Other times, totally at random, something absolutely minor will happen, and it triggers a storm, and suddenly you just need to get away from everybody else because you're going to lose it. You're absolutely going to lose it. You're going to bawl as helplessly as you did in that first week. I have been dealing with this kind of grief for a long, long time, and I've never figured out a pattern to those storms at all. And sometimes the trigger is predictable, and it happened to me today in the mail that I want to show you. I got the latest issue of the New Yorker, and it has this cover. The cover is by Mark Ulrichsen. It's called Summer Treat. You've got a human holding a treat for a whole bunch of dogs. Take a look at that cover. What is that? And what is that? I looked at this cover. Of course, like everybody else, the first thing I saw was that hilarious open mouth. Then I saw that 2 of the dogs on the cover were mine. My 2 dogs, my pair of dogs, a pointer and a basset hound. And I lost it. Absolutely lost it. In the hallway, picking up the mail. I could barely get in here fast enough before I just had to sit on the bed and bawl my eyes out, thinking what you always think in that minute, which is pretty simple. It's pretty elementary. I want them back. I want them back. It's no judgment on Frida. Frida actually knew Malin for briefly. They interacted. Malin was very old and very sick when Frida came into my life, and Malin also didn't want to be alive. She'd pretty much given up eating or drinking. She'd pretty much given in to her illnesses because the only thing she ever cared about was Lucy, and Lucy was gone. But they did interact. Frida never met Lucy, and Frida, of course, her whole lineage hadn't been born when any of my beagles were alive. And yet, for that minute, despite having Frida right there, standing right in front of me, asking, "What's the matter? Why are you like this? This is full crisis. I'm worried. You shouldn't be like this." Despite all that, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, bawling my eyes out and wishing my girls were back, wishing they were here. I miss them. Simple as that. All caused by a New Yorker cover. You can be sure I'm going to keep this cover. but we can talk about the New Yorker. Now that I'm done with my long digression about grief, we can talk about the New Yorker. I just wanted to mention that because look at that cover. Those are my girls. I've known dogs of all kinds, but to have the 2 of them on the cover and nobody else. Anyway, the main thing that I wanted to mention from this issue is a little bit on the frustrating side, because one of the things that's reviewed here in the cinema section is The Green Knight, the new movie The Green Knight, based on Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, the great poem written by a contemporary of Chaucer's. And a lot of you have seen The Green Knight, and I don't think I've heard anything but positive feedback about it, but I haven't seen it myself. I keep meaning to, and then not doing it, and I wanted to read the review. Of course I did, but the review is by Anthony Lane, and I'm not going to run that risk. I don't know why the New Yorker still employs Anthony Lane. When he wrote about, in a review of a children's cartoon, he wrote about masturbating to that cartoon. I assumed that when I read that review, I was astonished, first of all, and soiled, because I didn't see it coming. Of course, you don't expect such open pornographic perversion in a magazine like the New Yorker. I didn't see it coming, and I read it. It caught me by surprise, and I assumed when I finished that review that Anthony Lane had been fired and that he wrote this review as a kind of parting shot, as a little bit of, F.U. revenge. No, in fact, he'd been promoted. David Denby was sort of pastured out. Anthony Lane is now the only main movie reviewer for the New Yorker. They rewarded him for that. But I don't want to encounter pornography in my movie reviews, so I don't read Anthony Lane anymore, and that's a shame, because he was one of my favorite movie reviewers and also a fantastic literary critic. But I can't read his literary criticism either. If the New Yorker will allow him to do that, now that I know that he is a weird, untrustworthy, sexual pervert, someone who ought to be on a watch list. If you have those kinds of thoughts at a children's movie, then you ought to be on a watch list. Your neighbors should know that you have those kind of thoughts and that you're willing to publish them in the New Yorker. Now that I know that about him, I'm not going to read anything else that he writes. I'm not going to run the risk that I'm going to encounter that. So God knows what kinds of urges he had to satisfy when he watched Green Knight. But the fact that I don't know what he thought of it doesn't mean that you are a pervert. You may be. I'm not 100% sure. I don't really know what makes Donoghue-gonauts tick. But if any of you have seen Green Knight, I'd love to hear what you think about it. I guess is the long and short of it. Then the other thing that I want to show you, the other periodical, we also have a box, just in case you're wondering. The other periodical is the TLS, the London Times Literary Supplement. Look at that cover. Isn't that incredible? Hand-to-hand warfare on the Eastern Front in World War II. And that is the big article at the beginning by Omer Bartov, is a review of 3 books about Germans versus Russians in World War II, or Germans and Russians in World War II. First one is Stuart Binns' book, Barbarossa, A New History of the Operation Barbarossa. Then Jonathan Dimbleby wrote a book called Barbarossa: How Hitler Lost the War. I don't think I've seen that book yet. I'm not 100% sure that that's printed in America yet. I'd like to read it, if it hasn't been. And then the third one was a book we've seen on this channel, Sean McMeekin's book, Stalin's War, a big fat thing that we've seen on this channel. So naturally, I was interested to know what Omer Bartov thinks about any of these things. And then I got to the end of the review. You don't want, if you're Sean McMeekin, you don't want to get to the end of this review. As a work of scholarship, despite the enormous effort put into it, Stalin's War is of little value. But as a sustained polemic by a reputable historian, filled with seemingly authoritative facts and figures, however little they may signify for others in the field, it is far from negligible. Oh my, even from a distance, and not knowing Sean McMeekin, that is brutal. Far from negligible is brutal. And there was also a letter that I wanted to read you, a little library trivia here for you. A writer from St. Catherine's College in Cambridge writes, in his review of Reed Byer's History of the Private Library, A.N. Wilson, I think I mentioned this review by A.N. Wilson when I talked about the issue in which it occurred, makes the startling claim that all libraries of the Roman Republic were private ones, and that they contained nothing but Greek books. Grand private libraries, often pillaged from Greek cities, were indeed a feature of Republican Rome, as the state-sponsored public libraries later aggrandized the imperial city. But literary evidence, particularly from Polybius, suggests that scholars had untroubled access to books in Roman cities throughout the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, though it remains unclear where and how they read them. There is strong tentative evidence, archaeological and literary, that for libraries or archives in several Roman temples. As to what private libraries contained, we don't have a single catalog to tell us, but to suggest that the rich literary life of late Republican Rome would not be reflected in the libraries of its aristocrats is nonsensical as a proposition. Well, it was pretty strongly written. I guess scholars don't always have a lot of human contact to moderate their tone, but I think that goes without saying, right? I mean, yes, Cicero never mentions a public library, but in the reign of Trajan, the Roman Emperor Trajan, was a Spanish emperor, a military emperor, a warrior emperor, but a decent guy. From all that we can tell, a decent, upright guy. The predecessor of Hadrian, in case any of you are wondering. And Trajan never had an original idea in his life. No original idea ever crossed his mind, except when he was on the battlefield. He could beat just about anybody on the battlefield. But when it came to being an emperor, he had not an original idea in his head. And one of the things that he thought to do, and to pour a huge amount of money and time into, was carving out a whole section of one of Rome's hills in order to make a gigantic portico, temple, and library complex. Public library complex. The Trajan Library, the Ulpian Library, was a beautiful thing. Just beautiful. It was two conjoined buildings around a central courtyard. There was Trajan's Column was all the way up the middle of that courtyard. Trajan's Column is famous for how much, the endless wealth of detail that it gives us about a whole bunch of things, if you just know what you're reading, because it's carved in bas-relief all the way to the top. But the reason why it's carved in relief is because patrons of the libraries went up on either side for many stories. So you could actually look at the different parts of the column right out the window. You know, if you look at I've actually heard people, tourists and whatnot, say, well, why would they carve this thing if you can't even see the carvings way up there? Because you weren't looking at all of it from the ground. The libraries that aren't there anymore used to be right alongside the column so that you could climb up the stairs, up the different floors of that library to look at the column. But the libraries, one of those conjoined buildings was all Greek works and the other was all Latin works. And it was a vast thing, and it was one of 20, at least, vast public libraries in first century Rome. So, although I wouldn't use the bear-baiting tone of that letter writer, it is kind of nonsensical to say that came from nowhere. Of course, that had to be true in the Republican era. Of course it did. One way or another, I thought that was fascinating for all of you library geeks out there. But we also have a package. We have a box for this weird mail haul. It's a weird feeling day. Not a hint of sunlight, but it is very much feeling like rain. I don't know if that'll happen. The last few times that it's felt like rain, the rain has just disappeared. Massachusetts badly needs rain, but the rain has just vanished. I don't know if that's going to happen now. But boy, oh boy, it feels that way. So I don't know what the Bean and I are going to do. You know, it's at times like this that I sort of wonder. We're about I don't know, 45 minutes out from our big walk. We do one big walk a day if I'm up for it. We do one big walk a day, and we're about a little ways off from that. And I don't want us to be, you know, a mile away from the front door when the skies open up. So look, I'm gonna have to think about that. But what have we got here in the meantime? This is from the folks at Princeton University Press. Oh, okay, all right. This is something new. This comes out in late August. I don't think I ever got an advanced copy of this. I don't think I get advanced copies from Princeton. I think they just send me finished copies. Fine by me. The fastest gun east of the Pecos, so I don't need an advanced copy a lot of the time, unless I'm sending it to a freelancer. In which case, an advanced copy is nice to have. I get so that I just know she's going to pop down. I don't want to knock over any equipment. So what have we got here? This is by Karen Greenberg, and it's called Subtle Tools: The Dismantling of American Democracy from the War on Terror to Donald Trump. Dismantling of American democracy. Recent poll among American Republicans, 67% said that they don't think that democracy is working, and over 70% said that voting is a privilege, not a right. A privilege, not a right. It's not your right as an American citizen to vote. It's a privilege you have to earn, and it can be revoked. So yeah, the dismantling of democracy is well underway. Anyway, what have we got here? Publishing just ahead of the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Oh, that's right. The anniversary of 9/11 is coming up, isn't it? Just over a month. 20 years. Good Lord. So a lot of you who are watching this video don't remember 9/11. Wow. For some, it may seem like Trump's assaults on democracy came out of nowhere. But actually, according to the author's Subtle Tools, looking at the laws in the wake of 9/11 show a straight line from 20 years ago to today. Thank God that somebody thinks that. Yeah. Although, you know, true Kool-Aid drinking Trump supporters will say, what assaults on democracy? They honestly just don't see it at all, or they see it and they don't care because it's owning the libs. But one way or another, it's about time. Not enough people, when they talk about Donald Trump's assaults on democracy, mention the immediate wake of 9/11, when the power brokers that be in Washington, the least of whom was George W. Bush, saw the opportunity of a lifetime to move this country towards autocracy, to make it into, well, anyway, let's see what the author has to say on the pub sheet. For example, the authorization of military force in Iraq, those are all in capital letters, that was an act of government. Guantanamo indefinite detention, holding children from their parents in the southern border. Laws in the wake of 9/11 were meant to look outward and protect democracy. Then, over time, they started to turn inward and attack American democracy itself. Okay, well, I'll definitely read this. I'll read it tonight. Who is the author when she's at home? Director of the Center of National Security at Fordham Law, an International Studies Fellow at the New America, and a permanent member of the Council on Foreign Relations. I think we have a siren coming, so we'll pause. Well, you need horns. If you're going to have a siren, you need horns as well. Now, you're going to start up honking again because you're not moving fast enough? That could be... No. Okay. All right, so back to audio. That's pretty impressive, especially a permanent member of the Council on Foreign Relations. That's pretty impressive. Okay, well, this is right in my wheelhouse, so I will read this tonight. The date for publication is the 24th of August. I don't know if that'll be strict, but that's going to be here in no time at all. I know it doesn't feel that way, but it's going to be here in no time at all. So that is our book for today, Subtle Tools: The Undermining of American Democracy in the Wake of 9/11, Working Up to the Present Day. Not going to be very pleasant reading, but there you go. I'm going to read it anyway. And this I would not characterize as a Trump book. So that'll be a breath of fresh air right there. So there you go. That is the mail. We have Subtle Tools, new study, political study coming out at the end of the month. We have the TLS, where someone sticks up for libraries. In the pre-empire days of Rome, there had to be public libraries. There had to be private libraries for ordinary collectors, for ordinary readers like you and me. It can't all have been Cicero. There had to be normal people. You know, the owner of a baking warehouse who suddenly finds that he has a going concern. The owner of a brick building factory suddenly finds he has a going concern, has a little extra money, starts to buy books. He's going to keep them in his home. We know a little bit about this from Pompeii and Herculaneum. There had to be a lot of those types of things. And if you have 5 people in one neighborhood of Rome who all have big book collections in their home and who love books and talk about books, if you have 5 or 6 people like that and they've got some money, you're going to have a library in that area. Soon enough, you're going to have a library. It's going to be fascinating. There are a couple of books coming out about libraries, and there's one book coming out later on in 2022, or in 2022, I think, on the private life in ancient Rome, mainly from Pompey the Great to Augustus. So that horrible, tumultuous period that is, horrible and not at all normal for Roman history. Most people didn't live through that kind of Roman history. Most ordinary people didn't. But it's saturated with sources. So you're going to write a book about ordinary people, even if they're going through extraordinary times. You're going to find more material on that period than you are on most other periods. There's a book like that coming out. I'm hoping that it deals with stuff like this. I want to know about stuff like this. Did a little neighborhood in the at the foot of the Janiculum, did it have a library that the citizens around it could use? But anyway, there's that, and there's also the New Yorker, which was a really, really good issue, even though I started with a long peroration about deep grief. Even though I did that, it was still a really, really good issue. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.